Julia, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Testing 1, 2, test. Okay, we're good.
Okay, all right, thank you.
We had a little bit of a technical
we go.
issue that needed to be fixed. We're sorry for the delay, but we will pick up where we left off.
So just to continue with the Board of Zoning Adjustment meeting from 10/31, the case was continued to November 7th because the homeowners association and their representative had submitted information after the submittal deadline for information. There was a request for the board to accept that information. The board did accept that information, and as part of that, agreed to continue the case to allow the board members to have additional time to review that information submitted by the homeowners association. And so that's why that's continued to November 7th. This particular property is a former location or a portion of the former location of the Glenmary Country Club. It's a portion of one parcel. There's a correction here on bullet point 4. That should be, it was rezoned in 1988 from R4, R6, and C1 to R4, R6, C1, and C2 under 96788. And the general plan binding elements that were approved with the latest revised general plan, which was in 1994, are applicable to this plan as well as the proposed binding elements for the detailed plan. Next slide, Brian. There's your site contacts. The location is on Bardstown Road, south of I-265 in the Glenmary subdivision. Basically where the pink dot is where is the parcel in question. Next slide. And this is a close-up view of that. This is the parcel where the existing clubhouse for the country club is located, as well as a few other structures and a portion of the former golf course. Zoning of the property is primarily R4, although there are some portions of the R6 that was rezoned in 1988 that does cross over into this property as well. Slide. Aerial photograph of the property and surrounding properties. This is the 967-88 revised general plan that was approved in 1994. Next slide. This is the proposed detailed district development plan for a portion of this parcel. Slide. These are the binding elements proposed by staff. And also, I'll point out that the general plan binding elements would also be applicable to the site as well. Slide. Okay, and the next slide. And staff findings that the detailed plan meets the requirements of the Land Development Code and guidelines of Plan 2040. Now, approval of this development plan would be contingent upon the approval of the conditional use permit because the board has the final say over the land use in this case because there is a conditional use permit for a private proprietary club, and the board would need to act on that before this use could take place. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Any questions for staff? So BOZA is yet to act on this case.
That is correct. So it was continued to November 7th. So that's the current date for their review.
Were there any additional landscape or buffer requirements that?
So they've agreed to a landscape buffer that's shown on the plan as required as for all conditional use permits. So it is shown on the perimeter that there is a landscape buffer requirement. So they do show that.
Good. I wasn't sure if that was existing or that's proposed.
Well, I mean, depending on, as part of the landscape plan review, which they'll have to do a landscape plan, they could use existing vegetation and have to supplement that depending on, what's there. And there is existing vegetation along those property lines.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? We will move on to the applicant's representative, Jeff McKenzie.
My name is Jeff McKenzie. I'm with the Denton's Bingham Greenbaum firm here, and here to represent the Glenmary Club. This request is a relatively simple one. As you are probably aware, the Glenmary Golf Club was in place in the 90s and has since seen less than successful days. As you can see, if you could advance to the next slide, the property at one time was in wonderful shape, and it was a great golf club. I think in the early days of the 90s, golf courses were in a position to do very well. And this one did fine for a while. I think the limitation is generally in the business, you need about 350 golfers regularly playing golf for a club to be financially viable. So in this case, my client has purchased this property. If you can advance to the next slide. This is the condition of the property when he purchased it. You can just slide through this one, and the next couple gives you an idea of the dilapidated state of the property and what the neighbors were dealing with as it was acquired. Now, what we have before us is the proposed use of the Glenmary Golf Club is now the Glenmary Club. So in general, this is a reuse and continued use of the property. And that's why most of the issues that are generally available and are generally of some concern are really of no concern here. If anything, we're having a much, much less intensive use than the larger use that included a golf course. So all of that work has been done, as you can see, and will be used as part of this. The property, and to be very, very clear, it will be a private club, absolutely private, like a golf club was before, limited to its members, so used by its members. All amenities will be listed. All amenities that you've seen here and all amenities of the club will be available to members as part of club membership. The maximum number of members is something the staff had touched on in this, and that was, I will point out that the prior club included all of the property owners in the initial deed restrictions. That was 800 plus members at that time as part of the original design of the property. The proposed users, as I mentioned, financially are typically about 350 or so. Our proposed limit would be 300 members, and I think that's clearly less than the others and well within the uses of this property. The hours of operation have been mentioned, and those we would certainly limit those to 11 o'clock at night. Prior to 11 o'clock at night throughout, as I think one of the letters from the neighbors has requested. As you can see, the amenities include a chipping putting green, swimming pool, volleyball court, and pickleball court. The pickleball court is the existing tennis courts refurbished to play pickleball. Pickleball is now the fastest growing sport in the country. To deal with that, we will add a fence that is both an acoustic and visual separation of those courts. But of course, the courts were there originally. The people who moved in at the time knew there were tennis courts, et cetera, and the use of those courts has not changed. In 2014, I believe there was a pickleball tournament on those courts as well. They can be used temporarily and set up for pickleball. I don't know if anybody here's a player, but it enjoys an incredible following in that sport. I think possibly because you can hold a beer in one hand and still play pickleball, I think. The restaurant will be, again, available only to the members. We have a very experienced restaurant operator who will come in and run the restaurant for the club. We have met I actually had 2 separate meetings with local property owners to talk about the project and what they would want in the project, and we'll adapt things like the menu and the use of things with our members once that's underway. There is on the plan a mini amphitheater, which we'll walk through. That is a grassy slope. I don't want anyone to think this is the Yum Center. This is a grassy slope that leads down to the back of an existing building. If anything, we will put a slab at grade for anyone to do presentations or play music or something there at that location. So that's not a structure or additional structure of any kind. Paid membership will, of course, be required. And again, this is just a way to restore the property to its former productive use. We can click to the next slide. You can see where the property is already under the process of improvement. We've had numerous delays in this approval, so it's, you can continue to the next slide to give you an idea what's being done to turn this place back around for the betterment of the community as well as the owner of the property. As has been shown, click to the next one, please, is the, I think you've seen this. You can see it's enjoys the buffers of distance in every direction. The facilities and amenities are throughout the project part of, are already in place, and neighbors and property owners in the area, of course, purchase with knowledge of all the locations of things as well. Next slide. So, and you can see here just kind of the layout of where it is on the property. Maybe the next slide is a little better for that. Well, it's still, so you can see clearly, this is, we're not using the entire golf course. The driving range, which is really located, I think you can see a diagonal line beginning from a circle. There you go. Go up right there. That is the driving range. Thank you very much. And that is located on an existing golf hole. There will only be 4 positions for the driving range there. It is, again, designed for balls to be hit in that direction, and that's the limitation. It is not, not anticipated that that will be a widely used amenity of the facility, but for its members who are there to do some putting, who want to go out and hit balls, that's the direction they can use that course as well. One other thing, the building, if you could also indicate the wedding venue, which is a structure down from there, that building right there. That is a proposed wedding venue. I think it's, we want to make sure we put that in front of you if the need is there. If members generally in these clubs like to marry off their kids and want to have a place to do that, we would anticipate that we'll do that, of course, in line with the other limitations on hours, et cetera. But that is a future prospective use. The swimming pool at one time was located where the amphitheater area is now. If you can go right there, that was the old swimming pool. That was a good distance away from the clubhouse. We have moved the proposed swimming pool up to and closer to the clubhouse, just for safety and other reasons. Makes a lot of sense, and that is proposed at that location. The again, that's as the membership drives that need. I think there's one other question about the fees in the staff report, and that is, I just will throw out that the fees will be based upon the market at the time. There are similar clubs out there that charge something like $125 or so per month, or something in that range for these types of clubs without a golf course. And that is the type of number, but again, this is, I know, certainly not the forum for a determination of the economics of the club. So to run through just briefly, I think each of the staff report items that have been mentioned, number 1, the accessory restaurant will be only used by the members. All the other amenities will be used only by members. The hours of operation I've mentioned as well will be limited to prior to 11 o'clock at night. The maximum number of people using the driving range at one time will be 4 at max, if that. And then on each of the determinations made by the staff report, we certainly agree that it is compatible with the surrounding residential community and conforms with the comprehensive plan. It uses the existing buildings, puts them to their best and highest use. The property is subject to deed restrictions and can be used only for recreational use. This is the use of this property rather than what's been done over the past, several years, which was just to let it lie fallow. The property is currently served by the public facilities, as you have here. All the buildings are set back sufficiently, and the fence and all that we've talked about will be in place. So this covers each of those items. And we would agree with each of the staff report items from the TRC review here as well. So I think can adopt those in mass, and unless there are any questions, I think this should cover each of the items.
Commissioners, any questions?
I do have a question. Jeff, when this opened as the Glenmary Golf Course Club, would I have had to have lived in Glenmary to join that club and play golf there, or could I have lived off elsewhere?
You could have lived elsewhere and that is one of our issues now, is that this is offered to anyone who wants to join the country club, the Glenmary Club today. I think that's where your question is going. It is of significance that, for instance, Glenmary at one point was run jointly by, the owner of that ran another golf course, Glen Oaks, hence the matching of the names. And you could play both courses. There were people who lived in Glen Oaks or lived in neither of those two places and could play golf at either. That I'm very aware of. I just couldn't afford it at the time. But that's, so to the point of, will we restrict this only to the people who live within a certain distance or anything? No, that's really not the limitation. We want to avoid any kind of enforced exclusivity of the membership. If somebody wants to be a member, that is what we want to be. We want a diverse group of people as members of this club, as diverse as the interests of the people who want to join.
All right, if I'm not a member, is that restaurant open to the public, or is it exclusively all of these facilities, are they just for members?
As again, I stated earlier, these are only for members.
And the wedding venue barn is proposed, as is the relocation. I mean, it doesn't exist. Some buildings exist, but the wedding barn venue doesn't, correct? And
The building, well, no, to be clear, the building does exist. It's an adaptation of the existing building.
so it's the maintenance shed.
Yes.
Okay.
And I have been amazed at the wedding venue business that now exists in the United States that didn't even barely exist a dozen years ago. And buildings like that are very popular. We would add, I think there are already restrooms there in place. We would certainly, it would be nicer looking than it is today, but the fellowship hall kind of attitude of many weddings now, is the use of churches for weddings has dropped off considerably, and the attractiveness of other venues seems to work. So if you're trying to collect a group of people at this club, this is the best location for that if a member wants to have a wedding. As someone who's just married off two of my kids, my only two kids, it's something you have to plan for and be able to find a location, and this would be a potential.
All right. I'm like the only person who doesn't play pickleball, but the tennis court will not be expanded. It would just be repaired and restriped, but not enlarged.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yep, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Glenn.
How does one become a member?
One has to apply and write a check. You typically, you'll find out about it through another member and be sponsored by a member. We haven't gone through that process yet. But again, the idea is to be inclusive with this rather than limited.
Okay, so,
in some
and
cases.
if a member goes to the restaurant, can he take a guest, or can he or she take a guest?
Membership clubs throughout Jefferson County allow guests. We'll have a policy on that. Part of that's financial. We don't want guests to come more than once, for instance, maybe twice or once a year. That's how it's done at every other club. If you look at any country club or any private club here, they do allow guests throughout the community. We'd like to be treated the same as that. I do want to mention the question was raised by the staff to us in an email last night regarding the notifications that went out. We've gone through that list. There's 242 notifications that went out. And of those, we scoured those and went through and found 3 that we would say, again, the process is, as for those from our end to be aware of it, that you go to the Logic PVA maps. The Logic maps are updated through PVA records, and you serve the property location. And we have done so in compliance with all the regulations and process throughout all this. And again, seeking substantial compliance in addition to the signage on the property. And this is a way of going out of our way to inform as many people as possible. both first and second tiers. And so we've done each of those. We've scoured those records as well since and have found 3 that we would regrettably like to be able to fix, I guess. And those were typographical on 1 or 2, and another was an interpretation of something that should have been another address. We, however, feel that among those, for instance, there's one that's not one of the 3 that somebody said this wasn't proper. Well, we sent at least one that was in addition to the first and second tier. That person also got direct notice. So even though one might have been incorrect, the second was correct. I want to put that on the record again, that was our intention was to comply in all ways with the regulations. Having scoured those the second time, we turned those into to the staff. They reviewed them. They went out. We've had 2 meetings with the neighborhood. There have been lots of activity, social media activity as to these meetings upcoming, et cetera, by the homeowners association and others. So there's clear evidence of actual notice in many, many cases beyond those notices. You may hear in a moment from the homeowners association attorney who will point out that they were not served at their location. Again, to the extent that parties were served, they were served based upon the Logix records that include the property locations. I raise that only because I know what's coming. I certainly have a lot of respect for the council who's about to step up here, but those are issues related to an unrelated litigation matter, and I don't believe this is the forum to go into that. Any other
Questions, commissioners? Go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple. Netting, you won't need any netting or screening for the driving range.
No.
That's, okay, good. I'm picture Top Golf. I didn't even go through that. And I think you said the hours of operation till 11 PM for all activities?
So that was proposed, I think, in an email that's in your file or in the planning commission file. We think that's reasonable. Again, we're looking at other clubs to see what their limitations will be. That does not mean we will have uses until that hour. We just know we can easily comply with that.
Do you know what the operating hours were for the previous use?
No, I do not. I think they're subject to nuisance law, which is everybody's subject to the same law, and I think we certainly will avoid any.
But are
of
you
our-
adding any lighting to the site to make it usable more hours? Of
We
the
are
day?
not.
No, okay. All right. That's it. Thank you.
That was one of the questions that I had was the hours of operation. And then the next question that I have is, what is the seating capacity of the restaurant?
I've not locked down the seating capacity of the restaurant. I think we're still laying out the tables. If you can, I can see what a guest would.
Okay, how big is the restaurant then? We can probably,
It's the same size as it was in the prior use.
that's how many square feet?
I'll check on that if you'd have a minute. Those, the facts I knew were the 24,000 square feet. Other than that, the dining, that's the entire building. The dining area, we're guessing about 200, 220, something like that would be the maximum in that space.
200, 220 people?
Yes, total seating.
And how about the number of people that would be in the wedding venue?
Not estimated yet. It just depends on how we use that space.
Because I was thinking if that building's 50 by 150, that's what I scaled it out on Google Maps. So that's give or take. But, you know, if you got 75% of that for seating, that works out to about 375 people there.
That's pretty dense seating.
What the fire code allows, 15 square feet per person.
I understand. That would be,
And they
you gotta have
could
you
even
have
go
a pretty good size aisle though, sir. But
they could even
yeah.
go down to 7 square feet per person if you took out tables. And then what about the capacity of the amphitheater?
Again, it's a grassy slope. I don't think there's any, again, I think the phrase amphitheater has been used. It is a slope of grass that will not include chairs or seating of any kind. What the capacity would be, I don't know. If somebody wanted to have a wedding, for instance, there and have a meal and then have the service or the service and then the reception, I'd say
It's an
about 200
opportunity.
people would be the guests. And that's to me, looking at the space, that would be a pretty good size.
And I guess where all that's leading me up to is I'm not convinced that you've got enough parking to accommodate your existing restaurant at 200 people, wedding venue at 300 and some odd, almost 400, and an amphitheater if it was a separate event.
Yeah, well, I don't believe that we would stack those events under any circumstances. So,
So you're saying that if you have a wedding going on, the restaurant will be closed that day, and me as a member, I'm told that can't go out to the club on a Saturday night because somebody's having a wedding there.
I think most country clubs have that same issue where they close for a private party.
Not familiar with all of them. I'm familiar with one of them, and we don't do that.
So,
They
then-
like to sell as many hamburgers as,
I certainly understand if the reception of the wedding is in that space.
but even with that 101 or 100 some odd parking places, I'm not sure that's going to be enough to cover your wedding venue.
And and maybe this is a staff question, because this is, the parking requirements were determined by the director, correct?
Right.
I don't know what factors she may have used in determining what was appropriate or not, or what discretion we would have.
So, I mean, it is a development plan review, so I mean, technically, I think, and I'll maybe defer that to Travis a little bit, but I think there would be some discretion that that you might have. Certainly, the board would have maybe more discretion since it's a land use discussion we're talking about here in terms of when activities are taking place. A lot of the discussion that Mr. McKenzie just went through is discussion that the board really needs to get into because they're going to be the one that makes the final decision of whether this use is allowed or not. And also how this use is going to function, hours of operation, all those kind of limitations. So in the end, it may be more of a board review decision than the committee, but I mean, I'll leave it to Travis to say whether that discretion is here.
I guess my question would be that, are there places for temporary parking? Because I think the parking issue crunch would be when you have a wedding, an event like that, and you really wouldn't want, from a policy standpoint, to have so much paved parking on the majority of the time. So are there areas where you envision temporary parking?
We have not outlined those yet, if that were the case. I think looking at the maximums, and I don't dispute the total potential maximums on a square foot basis if we were to squeeze that together. There is truly a market of use. I would anticipate that the uses would be mutual, it would be the same couple hundred people at max who would be sitting in the wedding and then heading to a reception. But now, with respect to alternative spaces, we're of the same mind. We really don't want to blacktop the world. I think the curves, again, in my several years of this, parking estimates have decreased over time. A lot of old estimates and requirements that are in place from the 80s are not really applicable anymore because of the use of Ubers and all kinds of other uses. And driving needs and have all decreased per use, per square footage of use. But I don't have a definitive number for you at this time, but that would be our estimate, is that we're able to deal with that with the same ability as the club that was there before, and certainly probably better.
One of the things that I'm concerned about is if there is not a sufficient amount of parking for your wedding venue, people might be tempted to park on the adjacent subdivision street. And that creates a couple of issues. One is subdivision residents might not be pleased about that. And the second thing is if there's parking on both sides of the road, that might leave not enough room for fire apparatus to get by. Concerned how we're going to handle that.
Yeah, certainly understood, and that goes for every user, every residence as well, and the residential users not parking and certainly not parking on both sides of the street. I can say that, again, it is our anticipation that we will not fill these parking spaces on a regular basis. These are, again, when I talk about 300 members, the likelihood that members are showing up all at the same time is pretty slim. It's the same with golf courses. When they were at the maximum, I don't know that there's any history of a problem of parking here at this location as well.
Well, the golf place that I'm familiar with that has a restaurant that also has a wedding, creative parking in places people, rather they not park. Fortunately, it's not in a subdivision where people would get out on the street, but places they get stuck and everything is going on at one time. So I've seen it happen, and I've seen it happen fairly recent.
Well, I think to the extent we can plan for success, if in fact we get to the point where that is an issue, again, I would not suggest that we pave for
One of the things that I would suggest that you have a condition of approval or a binding element or something that says cannot create the wedding venue until you submit a revised plan that shows parking. Sure, there's a sufficient amount of parking. There's site for that.
and
If we are approving this plan, it says in the project data that the wedding venue is 8,830 square feet. So which appears smaller than maybe what you scaled that barn, but maybe not. But if we're approving this development plan, we would be approving, and construction plans have to be approved and submitted, but it would be something no larger than 8,830 square feet. So
That's more people than what I thought would be there.
well, if I can, that you're talking about the outer perimeter of the building that includes bathrooms and an office. I don't know what else is in that space versus the net use of the building.
75% net, 25% would be what you would use for your bathroom, serving rooms and all that other stuff, which is.
And then there's kind of the altar area, et cetera. Having gone through this recently again, I'm well aware.
But they have so code calls for, if I'm reading this correctly, they're providing 101 spaces, and that is the requirement. They're providing just at the bottom threshold. I understand the concern because I think about weddings and, crowds coming in. I think it's a very legitimate question.
That means 4 people per car. We need to talk about more about that, but probably need to get all the testimony before we. Any other questions for Mr. McKenzie? Right, Derek Triplett, you're signed up to
Thank you.
speak in support, or are you just here for questions? Right? And is there anyone else that is here in the audience that would speak in support? Yes, sir, please come up and be sure that you fill us out a speaker's record form before you leave today.
Yes, sir. First, I'd like to apologize. My name is Chris Thieneman. I want to apologize for how I look. I was out in the field building our Taco Bell in Old Shep and wasn't planning on being here today. But he asked with the president of the HOA complaining and the legal, I can't get here, but I was literally in the field to talk to you about the barn.
And would you give us your address?
Yeah, it's 2606 Aaliyah Circle. Yes, sir. Thank you. And I wanted to talk to you about the wedding venue. I'm more than happy to make a condition on the size of the weddings. I came here really just to bring back the clubhouse and to do it legally and do it right. I was approached by some of the neighbors that they would love to have a place where they could have weddings instead of looking at a maintenance barn. It's really a nasty looking barn that they just store equipment in. I just thought it'd be nice to fix it up. If I was going to spend a lot of money on it, I need to make some money on it too. If not, then I could just leave it as a garage. I think it'd be better suited to have, but I'm more than willing just to minimize the number of guests at a wedding or just, so I'm happy to do that for you. I've spent probably about $250,000 of real money because I haven't been able to finance it because I need to get my approvals of my own money, fixing it up, putting new HV, everything nothing that we haven't gotten a permit for. We've done everything by the book. Nothing that we've been fined or anything. The majority of the neighbors are in big support of this. We just have a small number of people that happen to be in a power situation, and I'm proud to stand up against that and here to talk to you about anything. It used to be a clubhouse. I want to bring it back and have the neighbors that live around there have something to look at versus what it was when I purchased it. Thank you for your time.
Anyone else here to speak in support? Anyone else here to speak in support? Do we have anyone online to speak in support? All right. Commissioners, any questions for those who have spoken in support? And how about people neither for nor against or neutral? For nor against and online. All right. For the opposition, I have Donald Cox signed up. Would you like to come forward? Give us your name and your mailing address.
I've done this before. Don Cox, 500 West Jefferson Street, Louisville, Kentucky, 40202, and I'm the attorney for the Homeowners Association. There are about 800 homes in Glenmary of different categories, and the Homeowners Association is opposed to this plan as sketched, and I think that's the best word we can use for it, on the plan. Can someone pull up the plan like we did? Well, while we're waiting for this, I think the very first top line matter we must keep in mind is this is supposed to be, and I supposed to be, private proprietary club. That's what the rules talk about. And then we learned from Mr. McKenzie that it's semi-private. In our clubhouse there, it's not private. People can bring other people in. How many guests can they bring in? Well, the whole purpose of this section under R4 or R6 is not to turn clubs, private clubs, into commercial venues. And by the very way they're doing the clubhouse, where it's basically open season as long as you've got a member along, that's not what this envisions. Second thing we hear about is, well, we're going to have this amphitheater there. So is that only going to be people who are members? Or are they going to bring their spouses, their friends along? And of course, the real problem, because I'm normally representing homeowners associations, is we read through the hearing over here. Commissioners doing their duty say, well, we need this and we need that, and it's either indicated as a binding element or not. But here it clearly would be, I would think, a binding element. How are we going to know whether Joe's sitting at the bar having a couple of drinks is a member or not? How is anybody going to know? And particularly when we're talking about a wedding, how many people did we calculate could be there? 400, 300? And do the bride and groom have to both be members? That'd be sort of cute, but pretty unlikely. So we're bringing in people, and as long as we've got a guy who, let's just take the worst case scenario. A guy says, yeah, I'm a member. And then the whole audience shows up, and 10% of them are, 20% of them are. But what we've done is we've turned this area, which is smack dab in the middle of R4 and R6 houses, 800 of them, and we've turned it into a commercial establishment. And then when you throw on top of that the issue you raised, Commissioner Carlson, and that is, let's say this place is a booming success, and we've got 300 people there and maybe 150, 200 cars. And the test here in putting in one of these private proprietary clubs, and I'm going to go down some of the requirements, is that it not adversely impact the area surrounding it. And we're going to have, where it used to be, hole 5 and maybe 4 guys or 2 guys and 2 ladies in a cart running around. We've got 150 cars parked. Now that changes dramatically the nature of this 45-acre area. It's turned it into something it never was. The club that was there before, when it went out of business, it had 30 members. 30 members. Now, maybe there were a few other people, but they went broke because they didn't have enough people playing golf there. But the point I'm making is, if this is the success that these people think it's going to be a totally different area than it was when it was originally designed and lasted for 15 or 20 years, which is a quiet golf course. So let me go through some of the problems we see. First off, and let me just for a moment, there have been questions about the wedding venue, the barn. May I have pictures of it taken this. And I think what you can see is, I'm sorry, one, I've got another one. I've got, how many more do you need? Sorry. As you can see, it's one large and 2 nasty. Going to be a cold day. before that gets turned into a wedding venue, I agree. But if it ever is, number of people attending a wedding and what happens in the aftermath of a wedding, partying and other such things, none of which were ever on the card, as you might say, of a golf course. And this is completely changing a golf course into something it wasn't. Now, I will say that if all they wanted to do was put in a putting green or a couple of putting greens and a driving range, that would be consistent with what had gone on before. But let me just make a few points about the rules. The rule we're talking about is LDC 4.2.1, and it does allow the creation of a private proprietary club. It does not say a semi-private proprietary club, which they clearly are going to make this into. Come one, come all, just make sure you come with a member. And that is not, I submit, what is contemplated by the Land Development Code. It goes on to say, and this is really important, that the compatibility, i.e. overall design, location of buildings, parking lots, screening, and landscaping must be consistent with existing uses. And this is turning the area in question into something it never was, and it certainly isn't today. It, again, LDC 4.2.44, private proprietary clubs must be compatible in size and scale with the surrounding land use properties. Now, many of you probably haven't been to Glenmary. It's a pretty big subdivision. But if you have, and I've been in before you all before making this argument, the main problem out there is traffic. Traffic just lines up, and a new, smaller subdivision adjacent to Glenmary was proposed. And I came in here, and one of the arguments I made, and I even had some traffic studies, was that this 100-home subdivision was going to jam up even worse the traffic. And where the traffic real problems are is in the entrance and exit from Glenmary because of Bardstown Road, and it's right by the expressway, and it's just a mess. So we're going to bring in 200 people for a party, and it's just going to blow up the traffic problems that we already have. And then, as Mr. McKenzie recognized, we have a declaration of covenants and conditions and restrictions for this section of the Glenmary subdivision, which we've litigated before in front of you all. And the circuit court reversed the decision over here and found that those rules had to be followed. And one of the rules is no noxious or offensive trade or activity shall be conducted on any lot. And then it goes on, more importantly, nor shall anything be done which may be or become an annoyance or nuisance to the neighborhood. 200 cars parked in this area right next to, I don't know how many homes are here, probably 50 or 60. Those people are just going to love those cars, sit on their back porch and count the number of Ferraris that pull up. I mean, it's just not consistent with what we have. And then there is the noise ordinance. And this is a city ordinance. It's in our papers. Shall be unlawful for any person within Louisville Metro, and it goes on to say that to make loud, harsh, or excessive noises. And that's the ordinance number is 99.02A. And then 99.01 defines an unreasonable noise as any manufactured noise plainly audible at a distance of 50 feet from its point of origin or examination. And if you look on this chart, and I don't have the, I'm going to have to figure out a better way of doing this. Sort of in the right in the middle of the there you go. Right in the middle of this area is, it looks like three courts right there. And if you measure the distance between the top of those pickleball courts and the property behind them, about 50 feet, 50 feet. And you've got, it looks from here, let's see.
Sorry, can we get you back to the mic? Just so people online can hear. Appreciate it.
Pickleball can be either 1-on-1 or 2-on-2. So the maximum number of players with 3 courts would be a dozen. And the minimum number would be 6. So I have done a study of pickleball courts. And we included in our papers the sound for a month of pickleball courts. And we recorded them, and there's a typo in our report. It says they're 170 feet away. They were 130 feet away. And what it showed was the noises generated by a pickleball court, and this was a single court in somebody's backyard, was 8 times the background noise. And so we've got 3 of these in these poor people's backyard, not at 130 feet, but at 50 feet. And I submit that those pickleball courts alone violate the nuisance ordinance, the sound ordinance, and so forth. So, in closing, I want to make 3 points. One, this is a wholly different and extreme misusage of a golf course to the detriment of surrounding neighbors and indeed the entire subdivision. And if this is allowed to be constructed, I have no doubt that at a minimum, the houses surrounding this area are going to be economically diminished in value. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
We will see if there's others that'll speak in opposition, and once they get done speaking, then we'll ask our questions because another speaker might answer a question we have in our mind.
Sure.
So let's see if there are others that would like to speak in opposition. Yes, sir, please come forward. Give us your name and address, please, and
Joe Schweinhardt. I am a resident of Glenmary, 10305 Long Barn Court. I'm here, probably could discuss several things, but I'm here to talk about the wedding venue and the barn. You've seen the barn, you've seen what it looks like, you've seen the area it's in. The problem we have with this whole thing, the neighbors have with this whole thing, is we're a residential neighborhood. And you're forcing commercial development into a residential neighborhood. This barn and this wedding venue, it all sounds, oh, it's a wedding venue. Well, what happens if there's a retirement party in there? Is that allowed? That goes on till midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning. Is that allowed? We know the restaurant doesn't. It's closed at 11, but I've never heard anybody say anything about the time limits on that. The other thing is the parking, and you all got into that, which is a very real issue to all the neighbors, because when that barn and that parking lot is full, or it's full because they're using the restaurant or they're playing pickleball or whatever, that parking is going to go down the residential streets all the way around. This is a quiet, nice neighborhood. You're not supposed to have all this parking going down the street. That's not why this was here. Didn't have that problem when the golf course was there. But this is a commercial development in a residential neighborhood. Can't have that. That's not the way this works. Take it out on Bardstown Road. Take it out on Shelbyville Road. That's where you put things like that. And there's plenty of places there for it. It doesn't have to be here. If he tears down that barn, he's going to put up something that looks like a Taj Mahal, I guess. And it's going to look nice, except it's not going to fit in the neighborhood. The residents are not happy about this. They're not happy about all the traffic. They're not happy about the noise. It's obviously going to be there. You all made questions about it. You know it. It should not be allowed as part of this. Somebody has to stand up and say, stop. This is enough, because there's too many questions here. If you had and I liken this to, we've got an empty spot here. You can see all the houses around it, and this really doesn't do it justice because it's a lot tighter than it looks on this drawing. If you had an empty lot next to your house and somebody came in and said, you know, I can make money if I put a wedding venue in there, you wouldn't want that. Wouldn't have anywhere for parking. Or what happens if they came in and said, you know, I can put a McDonald's here. This would make money. You don't want that. That's the same here. Same we're doing here. We're in a residential neighborhood. We don't want that commercial. We've got places for that commercial development. It's not in the middle of all the housing. Let's see if I've got anything else on here. Oh, they also brought up the fact that this wedding venue, his words were, the wedding venue, the buildings have become very popular, almost like Fellowship Hall. Well, if this place becomes very popular, we've got some real issues because we're going to have traffic everywhere. So we're very concerned about that. We think this should not be allowed. That is a maintenance barn. All it is. No problems with it, no traffic. It was a maintenance barn. And that's why it was there. I think everything else has been addressed. It's just not right and it's not fair and it shouldn't happen. And I'll get out of your way. Thank you very much.
thank you, sir. Anyone else that would like to speak in opposition? Or give us your name and address, please.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Bob Thompson. I am the president of the Glenmary Homeowner Association. I live at 10303 Colonel Hancock Drive. A lot of what I was going to say has already been covered well, so I think it's just important for me to make a few points. I will say a couple of things. I am a 30-year resident of Glenmary now, And I am the newly re-elected president. I've been the president of the HOA of 868 homes for, this will be the 5th year. And the sole purpose of the HOA is to ensure that we support this neighborhood in the adherence to our existing governing docs, our deed restrictions, our bylaws. And we've had a lot of challenges, and we've dealt with that. And we've established a few things that you all are well aware of. The deed restrictions have been established in the circuit court that, and in the state Supreme Court, that this golf property was an integral part of our development. And the Section 1 master deed restrictions apply. I don't think there's any question about that. So that's where I'm speaking from. We're really interested in the well-being of this community, peace and tranquility of our residents. And I wanted to correct one point. We did a survey last year, first probing the idea of, as a community, the idea of a club supported by residents. The club idea is a great idea. We're not opposed to that, but the original club that we had, the golf club, was an excellent idea, and it worked well for nearly 30 years. But as it dwindled, it couldn't survive. So, but we did do a survey, and it was very close to 60% of the residents, just for the record, that were not in favor of paying a membership to belong to what had been proposed. Now, of course, even today, I got more information today than I had heard up to now. So there's a lot of questions answered. And in general, the plan has some merit, but we have some big concerns. And anything that veers off course from the original intent of the recreational, golf club, and I was a member of that club for many years, so I know exactly what went on, how it worked. And we never had any event there that exceeded the capacity of that parking. I can tell you, I mean, I was over there a lot. I think that 101 parking space issue is a limitation because it's restricted by homes all around it. So that's a concern. And the wedding venue piece of this proposal certainly creates a problem. We have huge issues with that, and clearly that is a commercial operation. That's not a recreational operation. So that's our biggest concern. Besides that, it's the concern over interruption of our peace and tranquility. Mainly parking, noise, those sorts of things. That's our concern. So appreciate what you all do, and please consider us carefully and drive us the right direction here. I believe Mr. Cox has covered points well. I'm new to some of this. I'm not even clear what we're meeting about Monday. I have no idea. As a matter of fact, some of the confusion about these meetings and the timing. I did solve one mystery, the missing communication information. I had driven by this property recently 3 times, and there was no signage. Yesterday, I found it laying on the ground. It had been laying there for a while. The sign was there. I mean, they were right. It was there. I didn't know this, and none of us knew it. But some people had received the notification. I had not. We've talked about that. Chris has helped me out. I've got some better understanding. We'll deal with that in the future. So just for the record, there was a communication issue. I know the chairman Monday was upset about the communication. Apparently that was the reason. Any questions for me?
We'll wait and hold all our questions until the opposition
Okay,
finishes.
thank you very much. That's all I have to say.
Just as a real quick point, we have a sign-up service where you can get online and sign up for notices that's happening in your area, which you
Yeah.
wearing the hat that you're wearing might be a good thing.
Yeah,
to sign
we
up
were talking about that, and that was initially a concern. I thought, I don't need all this. I can't read all this. There's no way. But so there are filters we can use to help narrow that
It's-
down. I need to get that.
I don't think it'd be that burden.
Yeah, I'll work with Chris on that, or whoever else can help me. All right. Thank you all very much.
Others to speak in opposition that are with us today? Do we have any online? Well, no.
Debbie Bowling is online and is trying to get through in support.
Okay, we will allow you to call her when your time for rebuttal comes back up. Okay, all right, well. We will allow her the opportunity to speak. Let's just try to do things orderly if we can. Others that are here to speak in opposition? Right. Commissioners, any questions for the speakers in opposition?
I have a question for, I don't know if it's Travis or staff. Monday is a hearing for the conditional use permit for a private proprietary club. What exactly is the definition of a proprietary club, private proprietary club? Could you put it up on the screen so we could look at it?
I guess this is a piggyback to Glenn's question. And that go, is it compatible, I mean, with our 4, R6? Or is it a more intensive zone that's required? I mean, that, I get, yeah.
So private proprietary clubs, first off, can be located in RR all the way through OR3. So it's certainly a use for which you can apply for a CUP in R6. And it is not, it's neither the least intensive nor most intensive zone where it's allowed. Give me just a second and I will pull up the exact definition. Admittedly, there's not a great deal in the land development code about private proprietary clubs. It might be something that's worth fleshing out when we have some time in the future.
Putting it
Oh,
up. He's
perfect.
putting a definition.
I can go ahead and read that in case anyone can't read it or for the people at home. Buildings and related facilities established for the recreational or other common interests of the members or users, which buildings and facilities are operated as a business, commercial activity, or for profit, but not including buildings and facilities established for activities listed in these regulations as adult entertainment activities. So it's a pretty broad.
And then 4.2.44, I think fleshes that out a little bit more. 4.244.
4244.
Right, and so that's not really definitional, but it does have a couple of requirements, and I can briefly read those as well. So it lists the zones where it's applicable. It requires at least 2 acres of space in the granting of a conditional use permit. There's some specific language that tennis centers, racquetball clubs, or similar operations requiring large structures to house facilities shall have a development plan approved by the planning commission prior to filing an application for a conditional use permit. And then there are some subsections. A, all new buildings, structures, and facilities shall be at least 30 feet from any property line. B, outdoor swimming pools shall be enclosed with a fence at least 6 feet high. C, all recreation areas or play fields and parking lots shall be separated from adjacent properties by a solid fence or dense evergreen shrubbery plantings at least 5 feet high. And D is regarding signage. I can go through all those details if you want, but I don't think they're proposing anything more than what's allowed there.
Okay, and the chief might rule me out of order on this one, but what's the difference between our review today on the development plan and the board's review on the condition?
No, I think it's a fair question because the lines are a little bit blurred, or at least they can be. So the development plan for this sort of use is going to need to be conditioned on the granting of the conditional use permit, first of all, because ordinarily much of what's being proposed here would not be permitted in an R6 zone, but for the conditional use permit being granted. Now, the conditional use permit can govern a lot of the things that we have talked about today, things like hours of operation, things like either limits on numbers of folks that are allowed in the wedding venue or the parking required. Now, mind you, if let's say we get in front of Boza and Boza says, well, you can have 200 people and you need to have at least 75 additional parking spaces before we're going to allow you to have it, then it kind of gets kicked back to us, the planning commission, for a revised plan to propose additional plantings. But they have the ability to sort of gauge those numbers and, create trigger clauses and such.
Oh, okay, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Chris, do you have anything to add there?
Review today before the board has acted premature?
I mean, that's if they were proposing those type of facilities here. They're not. The reason it's before you is because this particular part, the golf course was part of the rezoning general development plan. So it's plan certain, even though hardly any of the actual property was actually rezoned to R6. The vast majority of this property is zoned R4, but it's plan certain because it was on that general development plan that was approved in 1988.
So Chris, help me understand this. So the fact that this use is severed from the golf use, because it appears to be a restaurant, you could bring guests. If I lived at Glenmary, I could have brought a guest. I could have had a daughter get married there. That it is now severed from the original development of a subdivision built around a golf course? Is that, and the addition of maybe this wedding barn, that's really why it's a severed piece of, because the uses seem similar. I realize we have to approve some, but is part of this because it's severed from the golf course land?
Well, I mean, the golf course was typically either part of a country club use, which had its own kind of requirements in the codes, and the zoning for that is a lot different and requires a much larger land area
Right.
and to be a country club. So this is a much smaller land area, so it wouldn't fall under the country club, wouldn't also have the same activities that a country club would have. So it does fit in general, the private proprietary club definition. The board, as part of its review, is going to have to determine whether they feel that the membership requirements and things that Mr. McKenzie talked about today and the uses in themselves fit a private proprietary club for this particular site. And that's what their review is going to be. So when issues were brought up about 4244, that's the board's purview. I mean, that is the conditional use permit language. They also have the general conditional use permit standards that they have to review any conditional use permit against as well. Those are the things they're going to have to review against. In terms of the land development code, we talked about parking. I'll just point out the reason the director's determination of this parking was fine. It's because if we did the restaurant as a restaurant, they don't be required to have 40 spaces minimum per the code. And that's what they would be required. So we're talking 60 more on top of that. That includes the wedding venue and maybe some of the other recreational uses. Because we're talking a 1 to 500 parking requirement for restaurants. So we use, as part of the to be determined language for parking, we look at the closest use. They had a restaurant in this use, we looked at that. And then we look at other potential uses and see what's closest in the code and what fits that. And that's typically what we do for to be determined. And that's how that number was determined by the director.
Thank you.
But what is it about this application that requires a detailed plan approval?
Because it's plan certain and they are
Okay. So
changing
it's
some
not-
things on the site. So
Not that it's got a tennis center, a racquetball club, or a large structure.
correct. It's not, they're not proposing to build anything like that on the site. They're reusing existing buildings. As part of that, they are going to be building a pool. So they are having some construction activity that would, since it's a plan certain site, would require a detailed development plan for the site.
Okay, so my question again is, why are we reviewing this before the board has reviewed it?
The only reason you're reading before the board is because the board's hearing date was continued to November 7th because additional information was submitted and the board agreed to accept it. And as part of that, also agreed to continue the case to November 7th. So it was not supposed to be coming to you all first. You were supposed to be second after the board. It just happened to be that way based on that continuance that happened on Monday.
But, oh, sorry.
That might be something that we ought to talk about after we've asked the opposition all their questions. And then if we've asked the opposition all their questions, then give the applicant the time for rebuttal and to allow that other person that wanted to speak that hasn't, and then, decide what action, if any. I assume no one has any questions for those that have spoken opposition. Mr. McKenzie, would you like to come up, or do you want to get that caller to speak before you do?
I assume your system is set up. I don't have any connection to that other than she contacted
But my question is, do you want to talk, or do you want her to talk?
If she'd like to talk, I'd like you to allow that to happen.
All right.
I'm
Brian,
not sure
can you
what she's
bring
going to say.
that caller in, please?
You can unmute yourself and turn your camera on, Ms. Bowling.
Trying to Flip all the right switches.
Bowling, you'll need to unmute yourself and start your video. We can see you. And you need to unmute yourself. We cannot hear you. You need to unmute yourself.
We weren't talking, but you can now.
Right. Caller, are you there with us? Have you unmuted? Can you say something so we know that you're talking? We have an indication that she is there. See her, but I'm not hearing her. Like she's talking.
Julia, can you say something to see, make sure that our sound is working correctly?
Sure. They've indicated that their microphone is not recognized. So I'm not sure that they're going to be able to speak.
Well, if it's on the caller's end that they're not able to get into us, I don't know what the fix is on that. So we've tried to hear what she has to say, but we are unable to make that connection from a technical standpoint. So, Mr. McKenzie, would you go ahead and go in with your rebuttal, please?
I will. Thank you very much. And I understand technological limitations. Just briefly, number one, again, this is a reuse or a continued use of something that was designed for this, and this is less intensive and it's using less of the space. And the golfers are not out in all those locations. So I just, again, putting that in place. I want to reiterate a couple things and cover a few others. Number one, you heard from the head of the HOA that they're not opposed to a club. So that I think should be very clear. So then now let's talk about the particulars. There's a lot of conversation about whether this is a private members-only club. I will say again, as I started and as I've answered questions throughout, this is a private club for the use of its members. And I think just as other private clubs allow guests to attend, we will do so only as guests of the members, as is done by every other private club that I know of, the golf clubs and others. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to play golf somewhere. That's just how it's done. However, there's an economic factor there as well, and that is that those clubs generally limit the number of times a non-member can come, and that's economics because they want to drive membership. They don't want moochers or people who are coming out to play or be in the club and who are not members. So again, to be very clear, this is a private members-only club. All amenities will be available to members, only members. Mr. Cox would have you have the property lie fallow and have the condition of the property decay further. As you've seen, not only are we fixing up, we've made that, my client has made that determination already to improve this for the benefit of the community. So I think that is clearly showing his intent to improve the property rather than let it go down. I think we've had, and you've heard, I'm sure, from many other situations where those who like the quiet of a neighborhood when there's not a user next door. The recital that the club had 30 members at the time it shut down, I think is just underlines a fact. The club failed because it was based upon golf only, and those golf memberships really drove it. We're not going to propose, and no one would in any reasonable world propose to limit this use to what it had when there were 30 members or worse. So this is exactly as envisioned as a club. Again, these are property owners who, when they purchased, had a plan before them that showed where the clubhouse was, where these uses would be. And in addition, that there would be golfers going along in golf carts and coming closer to their houses throughout the development. This is the same use as every other club. The HOA's kind of movement against outsiders is, as Mr. Cox has kind of described, is again not what we're after. This will be an inclusive club again for its members. And we believe it will not adversely impact the neighborhood, certainly any more than its proposed use as has been in place since the beginning of the Glenmary Country Club. The users that would be at this location, the number of residents, there will be local residents. That's one thing you've heard from a homeowners association president and two folks. I would propose that when we've had our neighborhood meeting, we have heard from those very much in favor of this club and its opening and its use. We will have members from this community who will walk over to have their meals and hang out by the pool and do all the things that amenities throughout Jefferson County are there for their members. In addition, yes, there will be others who may enjoy membership, but generally speaking, we hope that we'll have members from the community. And again, we don't need all 850 members for this to be a very viable club, and we've set a limit of the 300 as we mentioned before. Again, the phrase is come one, come all. I don't know how better to say it than again say this is members only for the uses of members. This is not a misuse of this property. This is not a commercial use. This is the use that you've seen for a proprietary club. The time limits, it was said there are no time limits. As I've recited, we're certainly willing to limit the time to the 11 o'clock, and we think we're very comfortable with that. Asking you to assume these kind of Armageddon facts of the worst case scenario, there'll be trouble in River City, are not the issues that you have before you now. The study of pickleball courts as recited by Mr. Cox, 8 times a level that is again unspecified. Pickleball courts are throughout other communities enjoying lots of popularity, not just in the users, but within the neighborhood. We are proposing again that not only would we fence that, but we fence it with an acoustic fence that by its nature online, availability, those knock down the decibel level by 10 decibel points just with the fence alone. I don't know when something is quoted to be 8x times some lower level, it doesn't matter really what those levels are. Under the nuisance ordinance, which we are all subject to at all times, the decibel level at the property line is 50 decibels. We will comply with that. And plenty of other courts have not had a problem with that as well. Again, this is a low intensity use. As you've seen, the minimum is 2 acres. We're well in excess of that. We have more buffer area than would be in place for other proprietary clubs. The staff report that you have before you says that we're in compliance with. They've examined each of these issues as you've had up on the board as well, that we meet these requirements. With respect to the wedding venue, just last on that point, I would just propose that we would limit the use of the wedding venue to the 200. I think the projections of 300 and 400 people is not anything we're interested in, much less likely in the use of that space. I can't imagine, really, you've seen the pictures. I thank Mr. Cox for handing those out to you. You've seen the pictures. My client proposes to clean that up, to improve that, again, for the community's sake. And if there's some use that he can make of that building, he'd like to do so, just as he's done with the other buildings. So if the proposed use of that is this wedding venue, I think everybody benefits from that. So again, the homeowners association, or at least Mr. Cox, is telling you, let's leave the building as is. I don't think that's what the community wants. That's not been our understanding. As you have the report of the local residents who've attended our meetings and what they've said about it, I think this is very, very popular for all of them. All of these improvements have been popular, as has been this club. I would propose that we meet all those requirements and all of the requirements, at least before you today. Certainly available to answer any more questions regarding anything that's been proposed or advanced against this project.
All right, thank you, sir. Commissioners, any questions come to mind? Questions come to mind?
Did I hear you say that you would agree to limit the wedding venue to 200 guests, just to clarify?
I did say that, yes.
If I might clarify one additional matter from one of the opposition speakers. I assumed that when you talked about 11 o'clock hours of operations, that was all uses on site. He indicated he didn't think that applied to the wedding venue. Was your intention to apply that to the wedding venue?
Yes, yes, it was. It was all uses.
Thank you.
All right, where do we go from here?
I can say the only concern I really had, or the drastic difference between the old use and the new use, was the pickleball courts, because they can be a little more intense, at least a little more noisy. But the fact that they're going to mitigate that, I think all of my issues are addressed. But then there's that bigger question of what exactly the Board of Zoning will approve, because I think for some of those outdoor uses, 11 o'clock at night may be a little late, but there's always the nuisance ordinance they can fall back on. So and maybe that's Glenn's point, the chicken and egg. Am I okay with it if I knew 9 o'clock was the turnoff? Probably, but leaving that to Boza's discretion, because I don't think that's within our discretion, because that's all within chapter 4. Is that correct, Travis?
So as far as that sort of chicken and egg question goes, here's my general take. We're not required to have a conditional use permit before we can approve a development plan that associates with a conditional use permit. We see these come through different orders, different applicants request them to come through different orders sometimes. This one was attempted to get the CUP on the front end. It didn't happen because of some other factors. So that's where we are. I think this body is still able to take action on the development plan today if it wishes. And if you have a condition that says, assuming, provided that the Board of Zoning Adjustment grants a conditional use permit, that's sufficient. That means we imagine as though they did approve it with whatever conditions they want this past Monday. Are we able to approve a plan that's in compliance with whatever BOZA might approve? And should BOZA on Monday say, you know what, no, we don't think this is appropriate for a CUP, then the dev plan's conditional approval falls through. I think that's really sufficient. But if this board would rather see what BOZA does, especially if they were to, I don't know that they typically require additional parking. They might limit, numbers and hours and such. But if they were, again, the applicant could come through and file a revised plan to deal with that. But this board could also hold the matter to see if BOZA has something to say about parking. So that is an option. But I don't think it's a requirement at this point. The other thing to sort of keep in mind here, and I just wanted to point this out, is that conditional use permits are subject to withdrawal if they are repeatedly violated. That is a much bigger stick, in my estimation, than the fines that you can accumulate through binding element violations. Not saying binding elements don't have their place and that obviously I think they're quite important tools, but the revocation of a CUP is a significantly larger use. We don't have that power here to revoke uses from folks, and BOZA does. So just to keep in mind, if they place an hours of operation thing and they are repeat violators, they have a much higher penalty for that than, whatever fines we might issue. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
It just seems like to me that it's a no-brainer for us to wait until after the board takes some action. It's their job to decide whether or not this conditional use permit is appropriate or not. It's not our job. And so we ought to let them do their job, and then we make our decision.
That's a motion? Well, I agree with you. I think we need to see what BOZA's going to do. I think perhaps staff can bring back to BOZA some of these topics that we talked about, hours of operation and parking things and, potential noise abatement. That might very well be things that they would be thinking about anyway. And we want to be sure that we don't assume they're going to do something and them assuming we're going to do something, and just everybody's working in concert to come up with the appropriate solution on this. So
Would That would then require the applicant come back for post-BOZA to come back.
Because they may have some, they talked about different binding elements and whatever that would give them the opportunity to craft their binding elements and perhaps even talk with the neighbors to see if there's some more common agreement and then them come back. Moses said, yeah, we're okay with.
Continue to the November 16th. Does that give Board of Zoning enough time?
They have a meeting on Monday. So last week was a special meeting, so
Okay.
they are on kind of an unusual cycle. How's that agenda looking, Brian?
For,
The 16th? I don't think it's.
for
Yeah,
DRC? Oh, we
yeah.
don't have anything on it yet. so-
Okay, so let's give you,
Continued to.
We put two cases.
Today, didn't we?
We do have.
Right. right, we want to put this at the top of the, I mean, assuming that BOZA comes along and approves the CUP. Well, if they don't, this is moot. And assuming this is approved, we've already had testimony. So we put this at the top of the agenda. I mean, we've had substantial testimony. There might be some additional comments, but try to keep it abbreviated.
In 220048 for the site at 10200 Glenmary Farm Drive, I'll move to continue this case to the November 16th, 2022 Development Review Committee to give the Board of Zoning an opportunity to act on the conditional use permit.
Second.
You have a proper motion and a continuance, any discussion? If not, would you call the roll, please, Brian?
Cheek,
Yes.
Price,
Yes.
Claire,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
and Carlson.
Carlson's yes.
Thank you.
We will see you back on the 16th.
Thank you very much.
See what our BOZA friends have to say. Let's go ahead and take a quick 10-minute break and we'll come back.